on the chat section so that at the end of the session you'll be able to pick your questions and answer them. Now, tomorrow, tomorrow we are going to have a session on maternal mental health. And on maternal mental health, there's been different cases coming up to us. So we are going to talk about maternal mental health. The society gets to describe what gender-based violence is, but there's a bit that is hidden from us. What is it that happens for a woman who is unable to conceive or a woman who's in waiting? They have been in waiting for 30 years with no child, but the partner gets to beat them or gets to marry another person. So they not only suffer from emotional violence, but they also suffer from physical violence, the bruises that they have, everyday beating, just because they cannot conceive. So that's day one. We are going to talk about maternal mental health. And on the panel, we'll have Edita Tripp, who's the founder of Wombs Trust, who are the women in waiting. And also from our Dr. Botium will be able to answer the questions in terms of postpartum depression. What is it that you can do? How can you seek help? And also, how can you keep your mental health intact, much as you have given birth and you're suffering from postpartum depression? How can you get the society to learn what postpartum depression is, and how is this related to gender-based violence? Because there are women that have been beaten. They gave birth to their children. 2 weeks down the line, they have suffered from postpartum depression, and because people do not understand what postpartum depression is, they have been beating them. Why aren't you feeding the child? Why aren't you doing this and that? You need to go back to your to your mother, come back after 2 years. You need to do all these things because the society does not understand the mental health associated with the conditions such as postpartum depression. So we'll have all that tomorrow. Also, Dr. will bring it clearly to us on how we can maintain a mental health during such a period. And on the panel, we'll also have from South Africa, Musa Malema, who's also part of the team. Now, Amy, I just want you to go through. The moderator will be Mildred Abiambo, who's also awesome, and she's a clinical psychologist practicing at Mathare National Teaching and Referral Hospital. On day two,
so on day two, we have substance, is it substance abuse, substance use and gender-based violence, yeah? So we have substance abuse and gender-based violence coming in on day two, and we have different presenters presenting on this. It's important to understand the role of substance use in gender-based violence because there's no data to show, but substance use just from the general aspect of it would predispose somebody to to being a perpetrator of gender-based violence, and also to being a perpetrator in the form of beating somebody. That's the physical violence. And substance use, if you're looking at it in terms of from the recipient end, it means if you're using substance, you're more exposed to forms of abuse, because then you don't know how you cannot respond in that instance against the abuse coming in on you and the violence coming in, and sometimes you'll not even be able to remember. So we will be having able presenters who will be taking through the substance use and gender-based violence just to help us understand how these interact. So we have the moderator who will be Anne Minyao. Anne is like a counseling psychologist, and we also have student campaign against drug. We will have Benjamin Odia also going to present on that aspect, especially giving an angle on the students and the young people and people who are in campus and in colleges. And then we also have the network coordinator, I have said, Dan Ayelabola, who's on Alcohol Control and Policy Network Kenya. On day three, we have gender-based violence nightmare in our family. See, the family is the basic tenet of the society. And gender-based violence, we can talk about it in terms of the females, like the man or the woman in a family. And we also have, well, often we children who are also part of these families. And gender-based violence is not something that is normal. So when it is normalized in our family, when it is experienced in families, then what really happens? And so we have panelists who are going to be able to talk to us about the nightmare of having it in our family, and of course to talk to us about how we can counter it in the family and how we can address this issue in the family. So we have Louis Gasnier, who is a parenting enthusiast. He is one of our panelists. We also have Dr. Kibi Jeffrey, who's a psychologist. He does counseling and mental health services. And of course, our moderator will be the Able Kaka Obutu, who's with the mental wellness with a smile. Over to you, Taffy, to just take us through the next day.
Thank you, Amy. Just as I earlier mentioned on the vulnerable communities, on the 7th day, well, technically the 7th presentation, but we'll be headed towards the last day. We'll have gender-based violence amongst the persons living with disabilities. I think this is the most interesting one that I cannot miss. And this will we'll have a panel of Joyce Wangari, who will be the presenter. She's a consultant psychologist and a research mentor. She's also very passionate about the deaf community, so she does lots of work with the deaf community, and she'll just be giving us a perspective onto how, this simple question, Amy, how comes you walk to the street and you realize that a mama is on the street with 3 children and they have been sleeping there, and when you get to realize most information about the same case, you realize that this woman is mentally ill. Or when you see from a very broad spectrum, you realize that they probably they're having a physical disability. What is it that happens in the street in the night or maybe in the day? Do men just come and grab them, and what is it that is really there? So we'll be looking at the legal framework for gender-based violence. What happens when into one, and how can you get help? Because at the end of this, we want to make people learn. We want people to come out and seek for help, and just come out and know that there's someone that can be able to assist them with this. So that's why we're talking about gender-based violence amongst the persons living with disabilities. And with disabilities, it's broad, so we'll be able to handle it all. On the next day, our moderator will be our able Ruth Ogando, of course. She'll be in to do the moderation, as lovely as she is, so you don't want to miss that one. Then on the 13th, on the 14th day, we will have martial arts and self-defense. We already had a physical activity on this on the 25th of November, and we decided to have an online session for those who are far abroad, so that we can get to learn some of the tips on what you should do. And I remember from the instance we had last time, Amy, we were being taught on several things that we can do and the languages to use. And we will have the very awesome Bata Okelo taking us through the session. She says, in the GPV, you do not say hello. You say hello. You actually yell the words. If it is something that is wrong, you call it by its right word. If it is sex, if it is rape, you call it rape. And you do not use another term that is easier or that the society appreciates more, because your voice is your first weapon. Even when the perpetrator is there, it's the first weapon. I don't want to give all the details because I am not well versed with this, but she is a trained martial arts and self-defense trainer. She works with Empowered Defense. And then we will have Betty Julius, who's the founder of Ambitious Girls 254, taking us through that session. Okay. Then finally, Amy, on the last day.
So, on the last day, which will not be, of course, the least, we are going to talk about quality rights in mental health. Now, quality rights in mental health, especially when we're looking at it in the context of gender-based violence and mental health, we do realize that mental health and gender-based violence are things that cannot be separated. They are things that go hand in hand, because, like Kathleen said before, mental health is daily lives. And what happens in gender-based violence is there is a disconnect somewhere, because ideally when somebody is at a position of power, they would want to protect somebody and they would not want to misuse their power, but then you find them misusing this power. And the basis of gender-based violence, what we are really talking about is the whole condition is based on human rights, really, because every human right, there are basic human rights, and everyone is entitled to them. Everyone is entitled to safety, to feel secure, and things like that. And so when we have gender-based violence happening, it is a threat to basic human rights. And that is why it is something that we have to come out and campaign against, and to make people aware that what's happening, and this is how we can work around it. So we have Joy Moore here, who is a medical psychologist who will be handling the quality rights in mental. And we also have Mary Sharon. Mary Sharon will be the moderator on quality rights in mental health. And this is a very important thing. I would say like it's a very important day, because it's really dealing with the relationship, really, the basic relationship of, see, mental health are primary things that we deal with every day. It is in us, but this is how it will relate to the law and things like that. And so I would encourage everyone to really attend quality rights in mental health, because the whole basis of gender-based violence is really based on human rights and upholding human rights. And over to you, Taffy. We will be having a retreat. I'll let Taffy handle that.
Okay. So that's like the last thing. I think it's like the final bit. But I don't know, after this point, we can take questions so far, and then get back to the last bit. So a question that came up on the from the group was, I think we've answered that already. It's gender-based. Why do you associate gender-based violence with women only, and there are men been put in septic tanks, and there are men that have been had their items chopped? Okay. I guess we've answered that one, right?
Yes. See, but gender-based violence, really, it is associated with women. We have said it because we are certain, and the data proves that women experience it more than males. But this is not to downplay that there are males who experience the violence, and it is also not to downplay that males may find it difficult to express, because there is shame that is related to it and things like that. The days of the, even though we're focusing on the woman, because we know that they get it more, we are not downplaying. Really, what we want is every human being should have the right to live in a world securely, without fearing that they will be intimidated, and without having their choices curtailed.
Okay. Great. The other question was on the health plans, but I believe that one we will have one during the presentation. So every day we will be having the health plan that is associated to the specific instances, and like we'll send you the child helpline. It will also be sending the GBV helplines that we have in Kenya for our situation. Now, there's a bit about the slide that I just put up on the UN system response to increased rate of violence against women and girls. So on the 6th of April, the Secretary General urged all governments to make prevention and redress of violence against women and girls a key part of the national response plan for COVID-19. So yes, we have a pandemic. The United Nations realized that there was so much violence going on in the home. Now, funny enough, there is a global pandemic that is declared on the March 11th, 2020. And then subsequently, violence against women and girls, and particularly domestic violence, escalated around the whole world, around the same period. So we're having people being taken back home, being told, you work from home. You go along the bars, so people are going back home. we're shutting all the schools, the children are back home. But anyone else who was in a different place, they are locked down. So the society now has to live with what they have at that point. This brought it evidently that there was so much violence that was going around to the extent that the World Organization, that the UN decided to have a particular plan and an intervention just to respond to this need that was there. And there were 446 member states and observers that expressed strong support for the initiative. Now, what is it that they did? Because now we have talked about basically what we're going to do, what we are already doing for the 6 days that are gone, and now the rest of the 10 days that we have. And Amy has brought it out clearly onto what it is. Now, globally, what did the UN system say in response to the increased rates of violence against women and girls? Because we cannot go quiet about this without knowing what global data has. The first thing that they said was make urgent, flexible funding available for women's rights organizations that recognize their roles as first responders. The second one, support health and social services to continue their duty to care, duty of care to violence women and survivors, and remain accessible, especially to those. Especially to those most likely to be left behind. Now, what's the theme? I said the first one was fund, so the funds need to go there. And if you can look at the first thing that UN came up with, you'd realize that making the funds available will be the first step to this. And then the second was on preventing. We already talked about some sort of the martial arts and the self-defense and other preventive measures that can be put in place just for gender, for the elimination of gender-based violence. Because it comes to a point where we can no longer just wait for it to happen. Okay, so this has happened. Now let's rush and see how to do this. How about we make measures straight? We have policies, we have guidelines. The government have very good guidelines put up in place, but most of them are dust shelves. Now we need to put all these, take them to the communities and say, okay, so this is what we think. What can you do in order to prevent this violence against women or just violence, gender-based violence? What is it that we can do, the preventative measures? And then the final one was collecting. If you notice, there's so much that has been done, but no documentation. And whatever is not documented is not done. So we need data. So this is also just let people know that we are going to be collecting information to see, because when you get to do a needs assessment, then you know where is the gap, what can we do about it. And for instance, for mental wellness with a smile, we saw the need. And we decided the first thing that we need to do, now that we're not meeting physically, let's organize for this sensitization to get to know what do people think about this, what can be done better, and what are the existing gaps. So that is one of the preventative measures that you can do. And even as you, as a person, as an individual, what can you do in your workplace, in that grocery shop? Can you just talk about it openly so that we make it so open, so that it's not some taboo, so that we talk about rape as open as we can and let people know this is right, this is wrong. We can no longer just keep it all in the closet, like a closet with so many skulls. You do not know what's happening, but you just know there's this closet that I have. We need to open it up and let people know this is wrong and this is right. And if we do this, then we have all the rights to defend this woman and know that this is the perpetrator and these are the legal things that he needs to face. Because you can imagine someone who's emotionally drained, someone who's gone through a traumatic experience, and they still walk the same street as their perpetrator. Amy, you can imagine that. Yeah. You can imagine a young girl. Yeah, so it becomes really tough. And the other bit that we looked at, that the UN also recommended, were place a high priority on police and justice responses. Because I know there's so many countries with the legal systems and the justice systems, but you realize that even at some point, people are not taken care of. You'd have someone molested, you have someone going through so much, they've been raped 3 or 4 times, and you're wondering, how has this never been reported? Or if it were reported, what happened? And you're wondering, is it the justice system, or is it just the society that is good with this? And things like female genital mutilation still up in so many communities. this is awesome. Are we really moving on, or we are still embracing some things that we call gender-based violence, and we are not doing anything about it? Now, the fifth one was put preventative measures in place, which I have already mentioned, and then finally collect. So we talk about plan, respond, prevent, and collect. And you say orange the world. I hope you know what it means, and you're just not saying it because you're saying it for whatever reasons that are best to you. Now, Emmy.
Yeah, Aflan, if looking at the report that the UN of course made their case on that. There's the UNFPA, which usually deals with they sort of deal with, of course, there are different branches of the UN which deal with the violence at different levels. But then when you have things like when the system is under pressure, then we have UNFPA coming in and helping. So ordinarily there is gender-based violence happening, and then now when you have COVID, this is like something serious. People are on lockdown and things like that. We realize that normal systems are pressed, and that we are living in a time when it is like everything is pressure all around, and it is now it is not uncommon then that the gender-based violence would increase in such a scenario. And UNFPA, of course, has trainings in this, and I would encourage our members to also look at the trainings on gender-based violence, especially in settings like what happens when there's COVID and things like that. And so mental health really comes in here because mental health is really affected by COVID. I mean, you used to have a livelihood, you used to have a way of interacting with people, then all of a sudden you are supposed to provide for your family, you are supposed to do everything, yet everything else has been like stopped and everything is changing. And I think it's really difficult for people to difficult for people to adjust. And so like the child helpline which are playing with there, and of course in Kenya there are coalitions which help women, like COVA, Coalition Against Violence for Women. These are organizations which are there, and not just for well, mostly for women, but there are structures in place which people can use to really address their concerns. But even as we talk about violence against women, there are recent cases like in the country Kenya which have been happening recently. Like for example, there is the case that happened in Garissa, Turkey. There are 3 girls who are under the age of 18, and these 3 girls were impregnated by the Shamba boy. So they are not young in the sense, I think there's a 17-year-old and there's a 15-year-old, and then you have a 13-year-old or something. And people, if you look at it on social media, then they see that these are people who can who agreed to it because they would live and actually go to these people, to the Shamba boys' house and things like that. But we need to remember that gender-based violence, sometimes we, like somebody who's under the age of 18, is not allowed to agree to things like that. They have consent, but you have to have informed consent. And if you're below the age of 18, so as a member of this movement, it means that we need to be able to stand up against things like this when they happen. So like, for example, this is an under 18 is being abused. I know there's the sexual violence to it, but it is also gender-based in the sense that they're young girls, and we are also looking at the economic aspect because this guy gives them incentives and things like that. So as part of the community, these are things that we need to talk about. And also we need to give support to people. Say, for example, these girls were not able to talk to their mother because they were afraid of what would happen. And if they come out and then you start discriminating against them. So really, as a people, we need to spend time on introspection. Like, what are your biases for gender? For example, if somebody is in a relationship, there is a case that happened, I think, somewhere in Bomet recently, where a guy killed a lover and the other lover. It's a complicated triangle. But what are your beliefs in this? Is it normal, for example, if people are in a relationship and one person cheats, is it normal for the other person to kiss that person just because they cheat and things like that? So we really need to look at things like that. And there are other things that are really obvious. For example, if you're looking at the situation of the these are contemporary issues which are happening, and there are forms of gender-based violence which we may not be able to address, but we need to know that they're there and we need to raise awareness against them. Look at the situation in Kenya with and young college girls, yeah? So we have sponsors and young college girls, and these college girls, the dynamic there is that they are above the age of 18 most cases, yeah? So really, the law does not protect them in the sense that they are children, so then they are able to make the consent. But is it normal for somebody who is above the age of, say, of course, intergenerational relationships, they vary from family to family, people to people. So for some people it's 5 years, some people it's 10, others it's 20, but it's normal what is happening. What we're having is that young girls are not economically empowered, and so somebody gives them an incentive to make them, well, to coerce them into these kind of relationships and things like that. And so when we normalize talking about sponsorship, which is